Okay, welcome everyone to our quarterly safety webinar. This one is entitled OSHA, the new walking surfaces standard. Yes.
I don't think you've started broadcast. It's showing attendees still on hold.
I'm hitting the broadcast button, but I'm not.
Let me do it here.
You got to do it. You have control.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, welcome everybody. This is the next in our series of free safety webinars sponsored by MSCI and Optimum Safety Management. This one is entitled OSHA's New Walking Surfaces Standard, and it's kind of a follow-up to some things we've talked about in the past. I want to make sure everybody understands how this is going to work. First of all our attendees are going to be muted, and that is so that we can limit the background noise, and then you can all hear the presenters as they speak without any interference. We will, however, be taking questions and answers through the webinar interface. So as you see on the slide on the screen here, we want to make sure that you have questions that get answered, and please type them into the question and answer capability here on GoToWebinar, and I will manage those and make sure that at approximately 10 to the next hour, we'll stop the presentation and do our Q&A. So I just wanted to take just a brief minute here before introducing our speakers to make sure that you're aware that Optimum Safety Management is a nice partner for MSCI in regard to safety. This, I think, is about our 6th or 7th safety webinar, and they have been doing them all. They are free, and we're happy to do it that way for everyone. So let me start now by introducing our two presenters today. First is Steve Yates, and Steve is a safety consultant and is the founder and president of Optimum Safety Management. Steve has a mechanical engineering background and a lot of experience in both manufacturing operations and construction technology. He's recognized for the development and implementation of safety management systems within many local, regional, and national firms. He is also an authorized OSHA outreach trainer and a certified leadership coach. Let me introduce our second speaker, Drew Page. Drew is the Director of Operations at Optimum Safety Management. He's currently responsible for the team of safety professionals and supporting staff which aim to achieve Optimum's mission, which is to partner with their clients to achieve best practices in workplace safety management, resulting in significant gains in engagement, productivity, and profitability. Drew is also the lead safety professional on multiple construction and general industry accounts at Optimum and holds a bachelor's degree in fire administration from Western Illinois University. He too is an authorized OSHA outreach trainer. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve and then Drew for today's webinar. Steve?
Great. Chris, thank you very much for the kind introduction. And as always, we greatly appreciate our partnership with MSCI and the opportunity to live out our vision of seeing workers everywhere valued and safe within the workplace. I want to just make a couple of opening comments, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Drew to take us through the bulk of our material today. We do want to make sure everybody understands this is an exceedingly large regulation. It's got a lot of moving parts. So we're going to be covering this today at an overview level. I would imagine that many of the webinar participants today are seeing this standard for the first time, some of them. Some have been diving into this for a good while along with us, and we've had a lot of good conversation across the safety committee on this as well. So there's a lot of principles to apply here that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be more descriptive than prescriptive, and what I mean by that is we're going to describe to you what the standard is, some of the nuances of it, but every facility is going to have a unique application of the standard, and then every scenario within a facility can also take on unique characteristics. So it's something that each facility will need to dive into individually and make sure that they're applying the standards correctly. We do have the safety helpline and companies like Optimum that can come in and help the members out with that individually. I would just remind them to avail themselves of the resources that do exist so they can do that. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Drew. Drew is our resident expert expert on this standard. He's been studying it for a good while, and we've actually co-authored some materials on it. So with that, Drew, why don't you go ahead and take us through the final rule?
Okay, great. So yeah, the final rule for the walking working surface and personal fall protection system was released November 18th of last year. So it's a complete revision of subpart D, and it also adds to subpart I, which is personal fall arrest equipment. It adds the personal fall protection systems to that subpart. It went into effect on January 17th of 2017, and you need to be thinking about the training requirements, which are due on or before March 17th of this year. So we'll get into what those training requirements are as well. There's some other dates throughout the final rule where we have some grandfathered in regulations, and as we get there through the presentation, it'll be evident because you'll see our nice grandfather in there. So some of the benefits to the final rule, okay? The final rule is going to increase consistency between general industry and construction. So when they've written this new rule, they looked at subpart L from construction, scaffolding. They looked at subpart M from construction, fall protection, and also the stairways and ladders from construction. So it's streamlining the two standards so they're very similar. In some cases, actually, OSHA has said, hey, if you're going to be doing scaffolding operations or have scaffolding operations in general industry, just refer to construction standard because it's all there for you. Another benefit is it reflects advances in technology to be consistent more with OSHA standards and national consensus standards. And it's written in a more performance-based plain language versus prescriptive requirements. So a great example is before it said, all right, 4 feet fall hazard, guard with guardrails. Now it's saying you have some options here. Guardrails, safety nets, personal fall protection systems. We'll dig into that a little bit more. So with these options, it's easier to understand and follow. It leaves it up to your company how you want to comply, which hopefully gives us greater flexibility for compliance. So what you're looking at here is just an overview of the changes from the final to the old. I'll point out an example like 1910-23 is now ladders. That used to be guarding floor and wall openings. Okay, and then you can see from the old 1910, 24, 25, 26, 27 all address ladders that's now merged into 23. So the standards rolled out a little differently. The standard numbers are different. And there's some new things in here as well, like the duty to have fall protection. We'll talk about that today. Also, like we talked about, we've added subpart I of 1910-140, the personal fall arrest systems. And so let's look at some of the scope and definitions here. So under the scope of the walking working surface, subpart D, the scope used to be all throughout subpart D. Now it's the first thing we get of subpart D, and it's saying that this applies to general industry workplaces and covers all walking working surfaces unless specifically excluded. Okay, so it gives us a nice scope. It also takes our definitions and pares them down from about 125 down to 62. The reason for that is the definitions used to be all over subpart D, so they were very repetitive as well. Now they're all up front for us. One definition I want to highlight is the definition of walking working surface. Okay, OSHA has defined this as any horizontal or vertical surface on or through which an employee walks, works, or gains access to a work area or work location. So they're specifically giving us a definition for walking working surface, which is very important. And then the preamble of the final rule specifically identifies floors, stairways, roofs, ladders, runways, dockboards, aisles, and step bolts as walking working surfaces. So they give us some great examples. Now the scope of subpart I, specifically the personal fall protection systems under 1910-140, that is that establishes performance, care, and use criteria for these systems. So the scope is clear there as well. Additionally, we have some standard definitions here. Right up front, these definitions have been pulled from the construction standard and other national consensus standards on fall protection. So there's things that you're probably already familiar with, but now they make it very specific in general industry, where before we didn't have anything for personal fall arrest systems. So let's look at some of the general requirements for Subpart D, walking working surface. And again, general requirements, it's organized a little differently, but this is nothing new. All places of employment, passageways, storerooms, etc., need to be kept clean, orderly, and sanitary condition. That is nothing new. What I do want to point out is that they removed from Subpart D the permanent aisles and passageways being appropriately marked. They removed it from Subpart D because it's actually repeated exactly the same in Subpart N under material handling and storage. So they felt that there was no need to have it in Subpart D. So if you're seeing that that's missing, don't think that you don't need that, you still need it. Additionally, yeah, the floors need to be clean, dry condition, and grates in place to help with that is a great idea, but we need to keep the floors clean, dry, and maybe even provide false bottoms or floor mats. Again, nothing new. We need to keep sharp objects, protruding objects, loose boards off of our walking working surfaces. However, they have added to this requirement corrosion, leaks, spills, snow, and ice. So they're specifically calling out these. So those of us who have ice in the wintertime, I know that's a big focus. That is a common injury, people slipping on ice. Well, now OSHA has a standard where they could actually cite you if you're not managing the snow and ice appropriately. Loads. So our walking working surfaces need to support the maximum intended load. Pretty general there. OSHA's looking for you to just comply. Before, they used to say it was very specific. You had to have the marking on the mezzanine. You had to have the building official engineer it out. That all still needs to happen. We need to make sure of it, but they took out those specific requirements. I just want to make a note, though, load capacity plates are still highly recommended if we have an area that we could be overloading. So it's not in the standard anymore, but that is recommended. This is new. So inspections of walking working surfaces, this is new. OSHA has put in here that we need to inspect regularly and as necessary and maintain in safe conditions. So what is regular? OSHA would expect you to determine an inspection schedule that adequately would identify these hazards for your company. Then they would expect you to do these regular inspections that you've identified and any additional inspections as necessary. So after a spill or a leak would be a good example. They also have called out in the preamble, you know, after a major storm, outside walking working surfaces, looking for down power lines and other hazards. So this is something that we need to start looking at and putting these regular inspections into place.
Very good, Drew. So I'm going to cover the ladders section for us here. OSHA's got a lot to say about ladders, and we just want to make sure that the members are understanding what they're talking about here. So in section 23, this covers all of the ladders except in a couple of instances like emergency services, or also where the ladder is designed into or as an integral part of the machines or equipment. So OSHA would not be regulating the design criteria of those. Otherwise, from a general requirement standpoint, anybody who's familiar with the old fixed ladder standard or some of the construction standards for ladders, again, they've worked to make this very uniform. So you're going to find things like uniform spacing, 10 to 14 inches apart. They'll have steps on step stool spacing and so on. We're not going to cover all of this criteria, but you are going to find that it's in the handouts, it's in the standards, and you'll be able to go back and and look at all of these individual criteria. Minimum clear widths are described here. Again, if you have fixed industrial ladders, this is really your application point for it. You're going to want to make sure that those ladders meet these requirements. Anything that you're doing with a portable ladder that's built according to the ANSI standard is going to comply with the OSHA standard as well. And you can pretty well rest assured, as long as you're using an industrial rated ladder, that you're going to comply to these. Standard requirements, again, if you're familiar with the old standard, ladders can't be coated with anything that would obscure any structural defects, or they need to be made with corrosion resistant materials, free of any puncture or laceration hazards, and then used only for the intended purposes that they were designed. You wouldn't want to be using ladders for ramps and that type of thing. As well, ladders need to be inspected before initial use in each work shift, and then more frequently as required. Now, this is something that we've often talked about within the workplace, that ladders need to be inspected before use. However, OSHA's just actually applied it directly into the standard and said that any ladder with structural or other defects is to be immediately tagged as dangerous, do not use. So you do need to know that. And then the question will come up, do we need to document those inspections? The answer to that is, if OSHA walks into your facility and finds a damaged ladder that's not tagged and it's in use, what they're going to say is that you've never inspected it. So they could end up writing citations for a ladder that's damaged in use, also that inspections were not performed. So it opens up additional avenues of citation for us as employers. So we just want to be aware of that. If you find that you're having an issue with ladders that are being used that are not effectively inspected and that they're damaged, you might want to implement a documented ladder inspection. That way you can ensure your employees are following that. Some other general requirements require that an employee faces a ladder. We know this next one is kind of the 3 points of contact. They need to be using at least one hand to grasp the ladder while they're walking up and down it, not carrying any objects or loads. Again, best practices for ladders for years. So when we get into portable ladders, they do have some specific requirements that the rungs and steps are made of material that will provide a grip for the feet, that they're equipped with a metal spreader or locking device for a self-supporting ladder, or what we all know as a step ladder. So again, just best practices, standard practices for ladders. Want to make sure they're not loaded beyond the maximum intended load, and then that they're only used on stable and level surfaces. Now, this next photo here shows a violation where an employee is actually utilizing that top step of a step ladder. As much as this is known, we still see this violated within the workplace quite frequently. So let's make sure that we're training our employees that, even though it's what many of us would consider common sense, they're not to be using top steps of a ladder. When we get into ladders that are placed in locations such as passageways, doorways, or driveways, OSHA gets very specific here, and they talk about them not being able to be displaced, so they need to be secured so they can't get knocked over, but also then guarded by some sort of a temporary barricade. Definitely something that would indicate a best practice that they've written into the standard now. No portable single rail ladders. That's kind of an obvious statement. And then no ladders to be moved while an employee is on it. So walking a 6-foot step ladder and those types of things that we've seen people do in the past, I want to make sure that that's not being done. Top of a non-self-supporting ladder or an extension ladder need to be placed so that both rails are supported, unless you're using some sort of a device that takes it down to one support location. And then portable ladders, again, this is a common practice with ladders, extended at least 3 feet above. You see in the diagram here the 4-to-1 ratio for use of an extension ladder. Again, nobody's going to measure that. The old rule of thumb still works, placing your toes at the base, reaching out and grabbing the side rails. If you can reach them comfortably from a standing position vertically, your ladder's probably at about the right pitch. If you've got to reach too far or your arms go past the rails, then the ladder's at the wrong pitch. You should be adjusting that to prevent overturning of the ladder. So Drew, if you can go ahead and cover our fixed ladders for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So many of us may have fixed ladders. And I just want to go back to Steve's point as well. When we're talking about inspecting ladders, That's a general requirement. So not just our portable ladders, but also our fixed ladders. There are a lot of changes and some different dimensions for fixed ladders, and we've called those out on the slide that you're looking here, the old rule versus this final rule. So this is in the slide deck for you guys to download, so you have this. We're not going to cover all the details here, but there are changes. Please be familiar with these changes. Also, we have our grandfather here again. So we have a grandfathered in clause where OSHA is actually they are going to be phasing out cages and wells from all fixed ladders that are more than 24 feet above a lower level. So by November 19th of 2018, what they're saying is if you're going to install any new or you're repairing any current or fixing any parts or replacing a current ladder, then it needs to have a ladder safety system. Before that, it's phased in, it's grandfathered in. If you have something currently in place with a cage or well and you don't need to fix it or repair it, well, you have 20 years to change that out with a ladder safety system. So what are we talking about here? This ladder safety system is going to actually hook up to the employee's harness, and as they go up the ladder, it'll let them freely go up, but if they fall, it will catch them. So they don't want to rely on the cages and wells anymore where someone could ping pong in. They want that person to be passively safe. So we have 20 years to phase them all out, and then by the 2018, if we're replacing or new, they definitely need to have a ladder safety system. Mobile ladder stands and platforms, a lot of different requirements here, too many to really call out on this webinar, but just know that the design criteria, if you're purchasing this, you are not going to have any issues. However, are we doing those inspections? We quite frequently see these damaged where they won't lock, they're missing feet, that sort of thing, and then we need to use them the right way as well. So moving into stairways, some general requirements for our stairways. So these are the general requirements for standard stairs, spiral, ship, and alternating tread type stairs. They do call out specific standards for each of these, but let's look at the general. So we have a handrail and a stair rail, all right? The handrail is in place when there's a wall. The stair rail is something that we need if there's no wall, and we need almost that guardrail system as well. So there's, again, some changes here in height requirements, and there's some grandfathering in. Anything that's in place on or before January 17th is grandfathered in. Anything new from the 17th on needs to comply to these new requirements. Also, generally vertical clearance, head clearance 6'8", minimum width 30 inches for our stairs, uniform riser and tread depths. Also, another grandfathered in is when we have a platform and a door swings open, we need clearance there. So if it's in place before January of 2017, we're looking at 20 inches. After now, it needs to be a 22-inch so that door doesn't swing open and knock someone down the stairs. Some specific requirements for standard stairs. They need to be installed at an angle between 30 and 50 degrees. They need to have a maximum riser height and tread depth of 9.5 inches and at least 22 inches wide. So currently you may have some stairs in place where the maximum rise and run is actually over 9.5 inches. And again, we have a grandfathered in. However, it still needs to meet some special criteria. OSHA has put out table D1, which you're looking at here. And if it is meeting this requirement, what's currently in place, then you're good. So this would be something that you need to assess your stairs with. Spiral stairs, again, some specific requirements. If you do have spiral stairs, OSHA's looking at these as a last resort, but if you do have them, you know, there's clear width, clear riser height, so on and so forth, must be uniform in size, but make sure that you're evaluating your spiral stairs if you have them. And then our ship stairs, those need to be installed between 50 and 70 degrees and have, again, some uniformity, so be looking into that as well. Alternating tread type stairs, similar to a ship stairs, but the treads actually alternate, again, between 50 and 70 degrees. Here's a great picture of how this could save you some room. But again, there's specific requirements for these that we want you to be looking into and making sure your ship stairs comply. Okay, moving on here to fall protection. So this is a big deal here for fall protection. This is brand new to the walking working surface standard, where it's giving us a comprehensive approach to fall protection. So the old rule, like I stated before, primarily said use guardrail systems. Now we get some flexibility. We can choose. We can choose via engineering and administrative or PPE. So different scenarios we can choose differently. So we're going to review some of those today. The fall protection standard, it's calling out in subpart D 1928 the duties to have fall protection. So this is telling us the areas where it's required and what systems are allowed. And then we go into 1910-29, the criteria for these systems. 1910-140 is the criteria for personal fall arrest systems, and then 1910-30 is our mandatory training. So let's look at the duty to have fall protection. We're going to take a look at falling object protection first. So if falling objects hazards exist, then you're required to have proper head protection, so hard hats. And you also must have toe boards or a canopy or barricade the area below. So this is a perfect example of them giving us options. Okay, duty to have fall protection. So this generally is calling out 4 feet or more above a lower level. So if we have a 4-foot hazard, we need to be protected. It does call out some exceptions. These are not exemptions for fall protection, they're exceptions. And we would have to go and look at that specific standard. So an example is on portable ladders, they're not calling out a 4-foot fall hazard to be protected. However, if we go to the aerial lift standard, we'll know that we need our personal fall arrest systems 100% of the time to keep us in that basket. It doesn't care what height we're at. So just some different nuances there. Duty to have fall protection, it calls out what you're seeing on the screen here. We've talked about fixed ladders and stairways. We're not going to talk about everything, but we're going to talk about the bulk of what you're going to be seeing in your facilities. So let's start with the unprotected sides and edges. This is the meat of it. So anytime we have an unprotected side or edge, again, that fall exposure of 4 feet or greater, we have a lot of options. We can use a guardrail system. We can use safety nets, travel restraint, so I can't even get to the edge, personal fall arrest systems, or positioning device. So they give us a lot of options. A hole, OSHA is defining a hole as an opening in the horizontal surface of your, and at least 2 inches or greater in its least dimension. Okay, so all holes, including our skylights, so if we have skylights on our roofs, must be protected, and they're giving us a bunch of options. We have covers, guardrails, again, travel restraint system and personal fall arrest system. OSHA goes on and says that what about holes that have a fall hazard of less than 4 feet? Yeah, they still have some requirements to prevent tripping and stepping into or through the hole. We need covers or guardrails. Openings, these are, this is a gap or an opening in the wall or our vertical. Spells out some specific criteria here. The opening needs to be at least 30 inches high and 18 inches wide. So they're concerned about something that someone could fall over and through. And if I can fall over and through that opening and fall more than 4 feet, then I must protect it with the guardrail safety net, travel restraint, personal fall arrest systems. Hoist areas, guardrails, travel restraint, personal fall arrest system, and then we look at runway and similar walkways. OSHA's calling out guardrails only. So this is the one area where they're saying only thing you can use is guardrails. Dangerous equipment, we have, again, a standard for 4 feet or greater, but we also have less than 4 feet. If you fall into that dangerous equipment, that's still a hazard. So they're giving us specific requirements. They actually remove the personal fall arrest system out of this because you could fall into that dangerous equipment with that PPE on. That doesn't help us. Dock boards. So at our docks, we can only use guardrail systems or handrails, and these can be removed. We don't need to have them in place if we're only have motorized equipment doing operations in this area, and the fall hazard is less than 10 feet. Additionally, those employees in that area must be properly trained. So you're seeing a lot of selection, a lot of different options here. So we need to evaluate all these areas and decide what are we going to use for your facility. So that'd be something to be thinking about. Scaffolding, again, it addresses straight back to the construction standard of subpart L, which subpart L for construction is going to tell us that when we're on a scaffold, we need fall protection, guardrails, personal fall arrest systems at 10 feet or greater. So they're giving us a little bit of leeway there. Rope descent systems, personal fall arrest systems only. Some special requirements on low slope roofs. So if you're doing any maintenance activities on your low slope roof, there's some different requirements. If you're within 6 foot of the edge, you have options. If you're between 6 foot and 15 feet of the edge, well, you could use this designated area. If you're outside of that 15-foot mark, so you're not going to get any closer than 15 feet to the edge, OSHA is saying that if you do some special requirements, you don't need anything in place. So I would caution that we dig deep into this and we look at this and we're doing the right thing, because there are some nuances. There are some specific criteria for designated areas and some specific training that we would need here. So what about all these other areas that maybe you're thinking about that weren't addressed, if you're thinking of any, right? Well, OSHA says, let's go back to our unprotected side and edges. You can use all of that again. So one consideration that you may be thinking about is, what about our rolling stock? Because we didn't specifically call out rolling stock. So we're going to go ahead and talk about rolling stock right now.
Thanks, Drew. Yeah, this is an area with a lot of questions and a lot of activity over the last few years that MSCI has been engaged in conversations. We've been talking about this at the last 2 safety conferences as we've been watching OSHA write this regulation and work through their proposed rulemaking process. And I would tell you that I have more questions than I do answers when it comes to the actual application of the standard and how OSHA is going to cite it. So we're going to attempt to do the best we can to address it here and give you some things to think about. But quite honestly, there are some companies out there that have worked through this and have some things in place. But some of this is still somewhat theoretical, and there's applications that are being worked through now and people trying to really apply this. So I think the best way that we can set you up for success here is to give you a discussion of what the rulemaking process went through, kind of what OSHA is thinking here, and then kind of what they've done to us when it comes to the industry. So in the past, we had a walking working surface standard that really had no definition for what a walking working surface was. However, when they wrote the construction standard, they did provide a definition there, and their definition ended with this exclusion. It said, but not including ladders, vehicles, or trailers on which employees must be located in order to perform their duties. So OSHA provided some wiggle room, if you will, in the construction standard. Now, I will say, though, they're taking it back these days because we are watching OSHA cite contractors for working on top of trailers loading and unloading materials in the field because there are new innovations in the market that are allowing for better fall protection. So keep that in mind as we consider these, even the exemption that was there for the construction standard. What OSHA did in their final rule, the way they ended the actual rule that's been published and is now in effect, they stated that the walking working surface definition is any horizontal or vertical surface on or through which an employee walks, works, or gains access to a work area or workplace location, period. They don't provide any exceptions or any exemptions within this final rule definition. Now, Drew and I, and Drew much more than I have, we've actually been studying the preamble for this standard, and it's about, what, Drew, 650 pages, somewhere in that area?
In that neighborhood.
In that neighborhood. It's a pretty extensive preamble, and as we've dove into that and really tried to dissect it and understand it, what we found is that OSHA notes that the final rule deletes the list of examples of walking working surfaces from the proposal. Now you'll see prior to that, they had included a list of example surfaces, so where they were trying to clarify it, and what OSHA themselves found as they discussed this with industry was that they were getting probably as confused as everybody else was, and they were starting to get caught in, what do we do in this condition? What about that one? What about mobile work platforms? What about trailers and rolling stock and those types of things? So what they chose to do was they chose to delete that list and leave the standard void of that. And then they go on to say, accordingly, and in true OSHA fashion, they say the regulated community is to broadly construe the final definition of walking working surface to cover any surface on or through which, and again, employees walk, work, or gain access. So basically what they mean is we're going to throw this out there into the community, have you guys all wrestle with how you're going to comply with this, and then we'll work it out in court as we go. Nice, right? But that's kind of the way they work sometimes, because again, there's so many different applications, it's difficult. So when we look at the proposed rule, OSHA concludes the preamble by saying that since the agency did not propose any specific fall protection requirements for rolling stock or motor vehicles, OSHA has not included any in this final rule. However, it will continue to consider the comments it has received, and in the future, the agency may determine whether it's appropriate to pursue any action on the issue. Now, I don't read that to you just because I think you can't read. I read that to you because I really want that to soak in. This is a big deal. OSHA is basically leaving it very open-ended, and the way OSHA further considers it is that they cite and require then the employer to contest the citation and work it out through an administrative law judge so that enough cases are tried that we end up with precedent set that we can all apply as an industry. Now, what I do want to make sure you understand is that although they said that they're going to work it out and they'll take further considerations, the question that is getting asked is, does that mean that we don't have to do anything? And I would tell you, don't be misled. Now, we're hearing a lot of stories about OSHA inspectors themselves giving talks at different locations, and they're making statements about what they think the administration is going to do or not do. There's a lot of urban myth and legend about what Trump is going to do. I would tell you, like I told the group last week, he does not have a magic wand to make these things go away. He's got to work through the rulemaking process as well as the Congressional Review Act and so on. There's recent things that are coming up that are talking about how they're going to ratify a bunch of regulations. I would just tell you, be careful, because there's conversation about whether DOT is applicable here or that it's not applicable because it's on a trailer and in your yard with a contract trucker. What's the application in the yard? What's the application under the roof? The reality is that falls from trailers are serious. The employee is often upended when they fall, and as a result of that, suffer head injury, and the frequency is much more than we would have thought even here at Optimum. We're hearing many, many more incidents involving falls from trailers. So the implications are innovations are available. They're not always easily applied. They don't work in every case. And what works in one plant may not work in another, or even in one loading bay may not work in another. you do need to look for innovative ways to protect your workers. And it's when they're loading, strapping down loads, tarping loads. Don't forget your contractors. You know, we want to protect our employees because morally we don't want them getting hurt, but also we don't want the work comp claims and the injury problems, but also contractors the same, right? We should keep them safe in our plant. And remember, they bring with them third-party lawsuits that can be quite significant. Now, as we move from the fall protection concerns, we're going to talk about criteria and practice now. And OSHA has clarified and written some standards here that will help us to make sure we understand what our guardrails need to look like. This is much the same as what it's been in the past, but they're very clear, very similar now to the construction requirements, so that's all the same. Safety nets. When we use safety nets, what you're looking at here on the left is a car repair pit like you'd find in a Jiffy Lube or an oil change shop. They use safety nets quite frequently there. You're seeing them here in between trailers. There are drop test requirements that have to be applied to our safety nets to make sure that they won't overturn the trailers or that they won't break through. So we've got a number of different regulations to follow there if we're going to employ safety nets. Hole covers must be capable of withstanding without failure 2 times the load. Very significant to understand that we cover with things that are adequate. And then personal fall protection systems, work positioning systems, and travel restraint systems all need to meet the requirements of 1910.140. When we look at those requirements, what we're going to find is that we must have a rescue plan in place. Things like suspension trauma with fall protection harnesses come into play. We need to have a plan to rescue an employee from a fall quickly, within a couple of minutes. Those systems need to be inspected before initial use and during each work shift. Components need to be used exclusively for fall protection, and they cannot be subjected to impact loading. If they are, they need to be removed from service. Fall protection systems here, we find personal fall arrest systems, we find work positioning systems, and travel restraint systems are all options that we can employ. But with each of those systems, we need to be considering the ABCs. We need to look at anchors, we need to look at body harnesses, and we need to look at connectors. All 3 of those need to follow the criteria found in the standard. When it comes to the anchorage, right, that's not just a place in Alaska. That's about as good as the jokes get. Anchorages need to be capable of supporting 5,000 pounds per employee attached. So you're seeing some examples of different anchorage devices here. Attachment point for the body harness needs to be square between the employee's shoulders, below the base of the neck, and between the shoulder blades. Don't allow that to go too low. We do see those work down on the harnesses, and then the employee would hang in a flat position instead of vertically in the event of a fall. They can actually be ejected from the front of the harness if that's the case, if it's down too low. And then from a connector standpoint, the standard tells us that these need to be manufactured a certain way so that their connectors are not going to corrode and so on, but also that they're compatible with one another. I want to make sure that when you apply that hook to the device it's going to connect to, that the gate closes and that it's a compatible connector. D-rings and snap hooks, they have strength requirements, minimum tensile strength of 5,000 pounds. These actually all get proof tested before they leave the plant to 3,600 pounds. And we want to make sure that we're buying these out according to manufacturing, according to the ANSI standard that applies, not something that we're just going to go ahead and make up and try and utilize out of some homemade devices. Another thing to consider when we start to talk about personal fall protection devices or fall arrest systems, as you see in the diagram here, we need to control the total estimated fall distance to make sure that the employee is not going to strike the surface below them. Things that get considered are the length of the anchorage connector, the length of the lanyard itself. There is a shock absorber pack in many of these, and you have a deceleration distance that can go as high as 3.5 feet. You will have some stretch and D-ring slide, so that's an additional foot. Then you've got 5 feet in the employee's height, and then a safety factor of a few feet. So whatever application you're going to tie that employee off in using a personal fall arrest device, you do need to work through these calculations. One of the devices that can assist in that free fall distance and bringing it down are retractables or self-retracting lifelines. You'll hear these referred to as SRLs. These limit the free fall distance to 2 feet or less and can actually assist significantly in reducing that fall distance. They also provide an added level of comfort and assist the employee in not being tangled up within their own devices. I want to cover training requirements briefly for you, mainly to make sure that everybody is aware that on or before May 17 of this year, employees need to be properly trained by a qualified person before they are exposed to fall hazards. So this means there's going to be a lot of training that's got to be done in a short period of time. This is literally about a month and a half. So major wake-up call. We've got to get some work done. The training needs to include things like the nature of the fall hazards, the procedures to be followed, the correct procedures to follow, and then the correct use of the equipment. We've got to cover things like proper care and inspection, how to properly place and secure dock boards if those are in use in your facility, proper setup of designated areas, and then the training requirements themselves. People need to understand what those requirements are so they can evaluate if they've been properly trained. And then, like most of the OSHA standards, you will need to provide for retraining when the employee has demonstrated that they don't have the requisite skills for the use of the equipment and so on. All right, that's concluding the bulk of the presentation here. What we do want to just make sure that you understand, and these will be in your handouts, you'll be able to come back to these. We've provided a summary of important dates for you so that you can make sure that you're meeting the requirements as you go through this standard and that you're able to evaluate your company's compliance and your level of compliance to the standards. So please make sure you do evaluate that when it comes to reviewing the handouts. If you have any questions, Drew and I are certainly open to taking your questions here at the Safety Helpline at any time you'd like. Give us a call and we'll promise to get back to you within a 24-hour period to begin the conversation and hopefully get you some good answers. Chris, on that note, what I want to do is I want to turn it back over to you to moderate our Q&A. I would imagine with a discussion as lengthy as we've had on such a broad-ranging standard, there's some questions, and we'd love an opportunity to help the members with some answers there.
Okay, yeah, there are some questions. They're actually interesting questions that are somewhat complex. So let me start with what I hope is a simple one. I want to make sure that we get this squared away, and you mentioned it in the presentation, but I want to make sure that a truck or a trailer is in fact considered a walking working surface.
Yeah, I would say that currently we're watching OSHA. We're watching OSHA under the old standard cite that as a 5A1 general duty clause violation. So, and most of the time, Chris, and I know I'm talking about citations and you're asking for a clear answer, and I'll give you as best I can today. Under the old standard, OSHA would address this issue typically as a result of an injury. OSHA was not running around the country looking at metal service center docks and mill docks to try and address whether or not they've met this fall protection standard. But what would happen is, in the event that somebody got injured, OSHA would walk into the facility and they would then begin to look at this situation and say, well, it's a recognized hazard. Maybe you've had some other falls in the past, and that would help them bolster that case. And then they would begin to cite the plant, the facility, under the 5A1 standard, which is the general duty clause of the OSHA standard. And what that states is that if the employer has a recognized hazard, they have a general duty to provide a safe and healthful workplace for the employee, which means they should mitigate that hazard. I'm paraphrasing, but that's generally what they've done. With this new standard, what they've done is they've removed the lack of clarity that the construction standard created because of the exemption that they put. They have obsoleted a letter of interpretation that has been used by attorneys and companies all across the country. I've used it in defense of companies, industrial plants in the past, for a rolling stock exemption. And that exemption was written mainly for the grain and feed industry in the use of tanker cars and the inspection of the top of those tanker cars. What OSHA has done now is they've obsoleted that letter of interpretation to pull it out of the public view for use in defense. Because they've changed the definition and pulled the exemptions or clarified that they're not providing the exemption and the letter of interpretation's gone, they're now leaving the standards open to interpretation in individual cases. And what you saw was that the industry must broadly construe the definition of a walking working surface. I would tell you that in my opinion, and this is simply my opinion, this has not been tried by attorneys and law and OSHA. I believe that OSHA will try to broadly construe the definition of walking working surface to include a flatbed trailer when, and I will clarify this, when the employee is performing work on that trailer. Now, what I mean by that is we're working in a number of different industries where standard practice has been to put items on those trailers that are about to be shipped but need additional work done to them. When that item is sitting on the trailer and the employee goes up to do work on that trailer on that item, the example I'm thinking of in my head, and it's not necessarily this industry, but in the precast concrete industry, putting a piece of concrete that's nearly finished and ready to ship up on top of a trailer that has to have its edges ground or a little bit of patching work done, that trailer will be construed to be a walking working surface because that part could be pulled off of there, put on the ground or somewhere else to be worked on. So the application for our conversation today is the same thing. If there is additional work to be done on a particular item, it should not be done on the trailer because that will be a clear hole that OSHA will punch through that definition and say it's a walking working surface. Where we are not sure what OSHA is going to do, and this will come out in practice or in citation practice, and then defense of a contest and final litigation through an administrative law judge, is what will OSHA do with the definition of that when the materials are being loaded onto a trailer? Now, we have seen in the past a 5A1 citation issued, and we've seen the threat of many of them. So now we believe that OSHA will begin to try and cite work on trailers loading under this new walking working surface standard by broadening that definition and interpreting it themselves. That's what we believe we will see happen. There's really not any sort of precedent to look at yet to see that. Now, where there becomes gray area, where I believe that there are infeasibilities, are when we're loading and we're under crane bays and there's crane activity that could interrupt fall protection devices and so on. I would tell you that I believe that OSHA will try to apply this definition, and the member companies will have to fight infeasibilities. I would also say, though, that those infeasibilities are becoming harder and harder to prove. There are issues where, nets could be used, or some of these airbags at some point in the near future when they're here in the U.S. market, which I believe is happening even as we speak. So I really want the members to understand that I don't have any silver bullet that will take away the walking working surface definition for them. And I don't believe anybody else does. And if they're hearing that they do, the member would be well served to press on that issue and not be lulled to sleep to think that just because somebody makes a comment that they're clear. I don't believe they are. So I know that's a very long answer to that question. I hope that gets us where the member was looking to go with an answer.
I think what I heard was a very, very long, yeah, yes, it's a walking working surface, or at least you should think of it that way for the time being.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to say emphatically yes, but you're right in your understanding of my answer. I think it's a yeah, probably going to be.
Otherwise, you get cited and have to fight through it, potentially.
Correct.
Okay, which is a very awkward position for OSHA to put people in, but that's what they've done apparently.
That's what they've done, and I will say that what I tried to tee up in the slide was there really is a cause for let's try to find solutions. When people fall off of these trailers and they end up on their head, that is a very, very significant, serious injury.
Right.
We talk at the conferences about driving to zero rather than sticking with our industry average 5.0 OSHA recordable rate. Let's get it to zero, and this is one of the ways that we can drive to that.
Which is another reason why I phrased my version of your answer the way I did, is that it's basically
Appreciate that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so one question that's sort of related, and I just want to address it directly, but then I do have another one I want to get to. There used to be, as you mentioned, confusion about the difference between the general industry and the construction industry standard on fall protection. And when is it required and when is it not? And my question is, in essence, does this new standard eliminate that confusion, knowing that you're going to tell me it doesn't, probably, but can we now ignore that confusion and address this new standard on its own? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, and I would say yes. I think it does eliminate the confusion because clearly 1926 standards apply to construction activities only. And the only reason that there would have been confusion is because of the definition in the walking working surface, because we were all trying to borrow that definition and bring it over to general industry to get the exemption from trailers. We just didn't have it before. Now OSHA has clearly pulled that definition or that exemption in the definition in the general industry standard. So I don't believe there is any confusion. The one area, and it occurred actually in a plant this week, the one area where I believe there is still confusion is that people still quote the fall protection rule as 6 feet in a general industry setting. And it's never been 6 feet. It's 4 feet in general industry. It's 6 feet on a construction site.
And additionally, it clears up some confusion where before it called out guardrails, but general industry would say, well, guardrail isn't feasible here, so I have to use personal fall arrest system, but there was no standard for it in general industry, so we looked at construction. So this clears it up where, they're similar, but now we have our own standard for general industry to tell us exactly how to use this personal fall arrest system. And there are still times, though, like for scaffolding, it'll just say, look at the construction standard. So it's very specific of when we have to look at the construction standard instead of saying there is no standard, so let's just take construction as best practice and apply it. But we need to be thinking 4 feet for sure.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. That's much appreciated. I have one more question, and it relates to a piece of equipment that I didn't see, and neither did the folks in the audience in your presentation, and that's a scissors lift. And as far as a scissors lift is concerned, if it has all the required railings in place, do you still need personal fall protection, a harness, movement restrictions, and so forth?
Okay, so per OSHA, a scissor lift is a scaffold. It's a type of scaffold. So per the new walking working surface standard, it says go look at the OSHA scaffolding construction standard. So we're going to go there, and it's going to tell us that if we have all our guardrails in place, personal fall arrest system is not used. However, it's also going to tell us we have to keep our feet on the platform. We can't climb the rails. We can't come out of the basket, right? So we're talking about a scissor lift right now. We're not talking about an aerial work boom lift or an aerial work platform. We're talking about a scissor lift.
Yes.
Defined as a scaffolding. Okay. So now there are tie-off spots inside the scissor lift, and the manufacturer, if you read the manual, if it has a tie-off spot, if you read the manual, it's going to say that tie-off is to keep the individual inside the baskets, meaning that they're not going to climb the rails or climb out of the basket. And it's also going to tell you to keep, it's to tether them in. So the last thing I would want anyone to be doing is taking that tie-off spot and putting a retractable to it, and now their employees are climbing out of the basket and they fall, they're going to pull that thing down on them. So the only point of that being down there on the floor is to keep you tethered so you can't climb out of the basket. And if you just have a good work rule, nobody's going to leave the basket. We're going to keep sound on the floor. It should not be an issue. You do not need personal fall arrest system. Make sure your guardrails are intact and everything's good with the scissor lift.
Okay. Thanks, Drew. I want to thank both of you. I think that's the end of our Q&A. We're reaching the limit of our 1 hour time frame today. So, Steve, if you have any other issues, I know people can always contact you guys at the safety helpline, and you're showing that slide right now.
That's absolutely right, Chris. Yeah, I just want to make sure everybody's aware that we do have that helpline available. It's much underutilized, and we would love to hear from the member companies, and hopefully we can help. It really is our goal to be a trusted resource for the metals industry here as we work together to try and eradicate some of the workplace injuries that are out there. So please do avail yourself of that resource. And if there's anything that we can do to help an individual member company with specific fall protection scenarios that they want to try and work through, we're certainly open to have one of our safety professionals come out to the facilities and take a look at individual scenarios. Obviously, that wouldn't be covered under the helpline service, but that's something our firm does engage in, as well as effective safety management system assessment. So we are here as a resource for the industry. We want to help in any way that we can, and we would love to engage a conversation. As we've been talking about, Chris, you were there at Specialty Metals last week, where I had the platform for a few minutes and asked the members that were there the question, wouldn't you want to know for sure that your workers are safe in your facility, and why wouldn't you want to know? So we do want to engage that conversation with the membership, and anywhere we can help to answer that question, so you can rest assured when you lay your head on your pillow at night that your facility is a safe facility. That's definitely where we want to be involved. So again, we do appreciate our partnership with MSCI and our membership. We thank you for the opportunity to present the material today and hope it's been of value to the members.
Yeah, let me just reiterate. Calls and emails to the safety helpline are free. So I just want to reiterate that so that folks are more willing to try that and use it than not. Okay, that wraps up our session today. I want to thank everybody for participating. We're going to leave the GoToWebinar interface open for a little while here because I want to make sure folks get the chance to download the handout. There are 4 handouts that you'll see in the handout section of the GoToWebinar interface. The very first one is the slides in PDF format from today's presentation. So all those charts, all of the standard requirements, descriptions that Steve and Drew talked about, you'll find in that handout, and it's titled 170330 MSCI WWS webinar.pdf. So you don't need to download all of the handouts, but I would suggest you try to download that one. We'll leave the GoToWebinar interface open for the next 10 minutes or so that you can all do that, and then we'll shut it down after that. So thanks, everybody. Have a good day and have a nice weekend, and no April Fools yet until Saturday. Thanks.